Why exactly is Dr. Fomunyoh doing this?
I think we gain so much from this interaction than we would through internet communications. I value so much the opportunity, and I truly feel fortunate to have the opportunity to share my thoughts, but even more importantly, to learn face-to-face from my fellow compatriots. I have always been amazed in a very positive way by the amount of passion with which Cameroonians talk about issues dear to our fatherland. You wouldn't get that kind of passion through internet conversations. I think it's always useful to get out there, to create these kinds of opportunities, to sit down and to talk and exchange views, because it helps push us through towards what Charles was saying, of being able to communicate on a broader level about things that are pertinent to our fatherland. The way that I see all of this is larger than my person. I see this as looking out, finding ways to have an impact on the lives of 18 million people. It's much larger than, taking a trip to Atlanta. If in the process of this personal interface interactions, we can begin to develop some ideas that can help us make propositions, as long as those propositions are helpful and get implemented, I think we would all feel that we've made a contribution. For those of us who've been working on democratization in Africa, there are not too many surprises. Sometimes our development partners get surprised, the diplomatic community gets surprised because they don't pay attention, they're not talking to the right people, they spend their evenings in certain circles, and they write reports saying everything is fine. But when you start getting into countries and you talk to people face to face, you get a sense of where the country is headed.
You've spoken about the contributions of the diaspora, particularly our contributions in the economic sphere. What could we do to transfer our contributions beyond the economic sphere?
You're right. I laid out those 4 assets, which I think are real assets for the diaspora. And my plea is that we use these assets. But it's going to have to be a collective effort. Because as Robert Kennedy said in 1966 when he visited South Africa, every time that an individual stands up against an injustice, he sends a ripple of hope. And it's the combination of those ripples across the globe that can move mountains. I'm just paraphrasing. But my sense is that we need a reawakening of our sense of purpose. We need a reassurance that we can actually do something. And perhaps once that critical mass is convinced ourselves that all is not lost, then we can collectively say, where do we go with all of this muscle that we've now built collectively to be able to have an impact? I agree with you about what happened in Africa at independence, and you're right. We had, we had pro-independence leaders fighting on the continent, but when you look at the history of the continent, you also would recognize that we had leaders who came from the diaspora. Kwame Nkrumah returning from the United States to launch his party in Ghana, Nnamdi Azikiwe returning to Nigeria to launch his party and become a leader in the country. People like Tom Mboya in Kenya, who went back even in Francophone countries. People like Ahidjo, people like Senghor, who had served in French institutions. People like Houphouët Boigny, who went back because they wanted to lead their country. There is an incredible advantage to be able to have a critical mass of people who can go back and make a difference.
You pointed the example of Israel, the affinity between the Jews in the diaspora and Israel. What is it that we can learn from the Jews? Number 2, you also mentioned that Cameroonians do talk and they try to get together, but they do it in a myopic way. Where I come from, you are saying that there is lack of leadership.
I think one of the critical elements that I see in that relationship is is an attachment to a nation state that is larger than any one entity in the state of Israel. I think a nation state has been created. Israel has created the concept of nation state to which all Jews aspire, whether they're in the homeland or out of the homeland. Part of the problem for us, and I did refer to this in my preliminary presentation, was the fact that somewhere I feel that we missed the boat on our transition, on our democratic transition or our democratization process, and that we have not yet put in place the institutions that can allow all Cameroonians to participate in the political processes of our country and to feel a sense of belonging and a sense of ownership that we all own that political process. Because that is how you get citizens of a country to stay attached to that country, because they feel they can identify with the institutions. I think until we get to that point, we still have got some work to do. I think that the diaspora, I wouldn't really say it's a lack of leadership. I would put it differently by saying that there is a desire to see some of the leadership emerge. Because talk of leadership in the diaspora, there is leadership in the Cameroonian diaspora. What I see is a desire to have that leadership emerge and relate to the fatherland, to our country, in a way that could have an impact, a positive impact that it's felt. We've got leadership in all aspects: political, economic, health, engineering. We've got Cameroonians who work for NASA, who are doing a fantastic job. We've got Cameroonians who work for the IMF and the World Bank, employed directly by these institutions, not coming in seconded by the government, who are doing an excellent job, and they're providing leadership in their own way. We have Cameroonians who are entrepreneurs in the US, who run companies of their own, and they're doing very well. So the leadership does exist. And what I see is a desire, a yearning for that leadership to project itself and look for ways to have a positive impact back at home. The conversations that are ongoing could help by putting out for public discussion some of the criteria and some of the suggestions that can nudge some of this leadership towards more engagement. And I think that's one thing that we could do much easily. And that's one thing that would also give a sense to some of these leaders that their contribution could be highly appreciated.